In the early 2000s, Starbucks looked unstoppable. The company had already conquered the United States and was rapidly expanding across the world. From Asia to Europe to the Middle East, Starbucks stores were appearing in major cities at an incredible pace. The brand had become synonymous with modern coffee culture, premium beverages, and a comfortable third place between home and work. So when Starbucks entered Australia in the year 2000, executives believed it would be another easy international success. Australia was a wealthy, urbanized country with a strong cafe culture. On paper, it seemed like the perfect market for Starbucks expansion. But less than a decade later, the company faced one of the most embarrassing international failures in its history. In 2008, Starbucks was forced to close around 70% of its Australian stores, taking a loss estimated at about $143 million. Today, Australia remains one of the rare developed markets where Starbucks failed to dominate. To understand why Starbucks failed to conquer Australia, you have to start with something many outsiders underestimate. Australia already had one of the most sophisticated coffee cultures in the world. Long before Starbucks arrived, Australians had developed a strong tradition of cafe-style coffee. This culture was heavily influenced by Italian and European immigrants who brought espresso-based coffee traditions with them after World War II. Small independent cafes spread across cities like Melbourne and Sydney, serving high-quality espresso drinks made by skilled baristas. Coffee in Australia was not just a quick caffeine stop, it was a ritual. Customers expected carefully crafted drinks, knowledgeable baristas, and locally owned cafes with strong community connections. By the time Starbucks entered the market, Australian consumers were already extremely educated about coffee. And that created a major problem. In many countries, Starbucks helped introduce people to espresso drinks and cafe culture. In Australia, that culture already existed, and in many cases, it was more advanced than Starbucks' model. Local cafes often served higher quality coffee than the large international chain. Australian customers could immediately tell the difference. Another mistake Starbucks made was expanding too quickly. Instead of slowly building a presence and learning the local market, Starbucks launched an aggressive expansion strategy. Within just 7 years, the company opened around 87 stores across Australia. This rapid expansion might have worked in markets where Starbucks was introducing a new concept. But in Australia, it created the opposite effect. Consumers suddenly saw Starbucks stores appearing everywhere before the brand had even earned credibility in the local coffee scene. To many Australians, the brand felt like a large American chain, trying to dominate a market that already had strong local businesses. That perception hurt Starbucks' reputation from the start. There was also a cultural mismatch between Starbucks products and Australian tastes. Starbucks built much of its menu around flavored drinks, syrups, whipped cream, and large takeaway beverages. While these drinks were extremely popular in many countries, Australian coffee drinkers tended to prefer simpler espresso-based beverages like flat whites, cappuccinos, and long blacks. These drinks focus heavily on the quality of the espresso itself. If the coffee is not excellent, the drink will immediately disappoint the customer. Local cafes specialized in exactly this kind of coffee preparation. Starbucks, which relied more on standardized processes and sweet beverage options, struggled to compete with the craftsmanship found in independent cafes. Another factor was pricing. Starbucks positioned itself as a premium brand in many markets. But in Australia, consumers were already paying premium prices for high-quality coffee from local cafes, and those cafes often offered a better product. This made it difficult for Starbucks to justify its prices. Why pay the same price for a chain coffee when a nearby independent cafe could serve a superior espresso made by a skilled barista? Location strategy also played a role. In many countries, Starbucks thrives in high-traffic urban areas where people want quick takeaway drinks. But in Australia, cafe culture is more about sitting down, socializing, and enjoying the experience. Independent cafes had already built strong community relationships in neighborhoods. Starbucks stores, which often felt more corporate and standardized, struggled to recreate that sense of local connection. Another important detail was timing. Starbucks entered Australia at a moment when the global brand was expanding extremely rapidly around the world. This meant the company was focused heavily on growth rather than adapting carefully to each local market. Instead of studying Australian coffee habits in depth, Starbucks applied a formula that had worked in many other countries. But Australia was not like those markets. The company underestimated how loyal Australians were to their existing cafe culture. As Starbucks continued opening stores, many remained relatively empty compared to nearby independent cafes. Eventually, the numbers became impossible to ignore. In 2008, Starbucks made the difficult decision to close around 61 stores in Australia almost overnight. Thousands of employees were affected, and the company took a financial loss estimated at about $143 million. The remaining stores were sold to a local partner that adopted a much slower and more cautious expansion strategy. Interestingly, Starbucks still operates in Australia today, but in a very different way. Instead of trying to dominate the local coffee scene, the company now focuses more on tourist-heavy locations, major city centers, and international visitors who already know the brand. Growth has been much slower and more targeted. Meanwhile, Australia's independent cafe culture continues to thrive. Cities like Melbourne are now widely considered among the best coffee destinations in the world. The failure of Starbucks in Australia has become a famous case study in global business strategy. It shows that even the most powerful brands cannot simply copy and paste their business model into every market. Local culture, consumer expectations, and existing competition matter enormously. Starbucks succeeded in many countries by introducing a new type of coffee experience. But in Australia, that experience already existed, and many consumers believed their local cafes did it better. In the end, the lesson of Starbucks' $143 million mistake is simple but powerful. Global success does not guarantee local success. Sometimes the hardest markets to win are the ones that already love the very product you're trying to sell.